The Supreme Court has finally made its declaration. The implementation of the 3 farm laws has been stalled. The expert committee has been suggested by the Supreme Court. It's been mandated by the Supreme Court. This committee will take stock of the ground situation at Singhu border. It will try to understand the grievances of the protesters, and it will try to mediate between the farmers and the government, perhaps to work out an amicable solution. Now, the first question everyone has is, can the Supreme Court intervene? Because this is a government which has been voted to majority in the parliament. So it draws its powers from Article 254 to legislate. This is a government that's been voted to by 25 crore people, whereas no one has voted for the members of the committee or members of the judiciary. Nevertheless, let's take a look at, can the Supreme Court intervene? Well, it can intervene on 3 conditions. 1, it violates the fundamental right. Now, some might say, especially on Instagram, some excited influencers might say that, hold on, MSP should be a fundamental right, but surely it doesn't really work that way. Second, does it violate the constitution? And third, and the most important part, is the parliament authorized to legislate on that matter? Now, some might get excited and say that, hold on, agriculture falls under the state list, so maybe the parliament did not have the right to formulate these 3 laws. But turns out it doesn't work that way. Under the 33rd entry of the concurrent list, the state and the center can make laws on the production, on the supply, and on the distribution of products. So this is where the center is getting its power from to formulate these 3 laws. And already the Attorney General has argued in the Supreme Court, before the Supreme Court, that these new farm laws do not violate any of these 3 instances. In 2019 also, the amendments that were added in 2018 to the Scheduled Caste and Scheduled Tribes Atrocities Prevention Act, these were the amendments that were added in 2018. In 2019, the Supreme Court refused to stay them, saying that they were passed by the Parliament and the Supreme Court had no business staying them. Similar stance was taken when it came to CAA. Now, there was Shaheen Bagh protests going on. There was these massive protests in small pockets of the country where people wanted a rollback of the CAA. The government rejected that, the Supreme Court rather, rejected the idea to stay that too, saying that the Parliament had passed a law. It did not violate any of the 3 discussed aspects. It did not violate the fundamental rights of anyone, not the Constitution, and the Parliament had full right to legislate on that. So in 2019 also, the Supreme Court took a very mature stance, saying that we have no business intervening here. And even if one looks at recent history, the Supreme Court has been really cautious when it comes to intervening on the laws that have been formulated by the Parliament. Now, the Supreme Court, in its discussion with the parties, everyone, yesterday and today, they made several observations. And while the Supreme Court said today that they cannot cater to everyone's opinion and their priority is to solve the problem, and rightfully so, there are some interesting observations the Supreme Court made which will have repercussions for policy making, protests, activism in India in the future. And this is the observations I really want to take up today. Well, for one, yesterday said that the CGI, he was extremely disappointed. The Supreme Court was extremely disappointed with the way that the government has been handling all the farmer protests. Well, for one, the government has been handling the protests very maturely. There have been 8 rounds of talks between the government and the protesters at Singhu border. All said and done, the government has been so mature at handling the protests that even if the Supreme Court, after the Shaheen Bagh entire event, the Supreme Court had said that the protesters have no business occupying public spaces and the government is well within its right to drive out these protesters from public spaces. Yet the government chose a soft stance on these protesters and acted in a mature way. They wanted to understand the grievances. Cabinet ministers have invited them for talks over and over again to the Vigyan Bhavan. There have been ample of opportunities to understand the grievances and those efforts have been made by the government. So for the Supreme Court to say that the government has not made any effort in understanding the farmers and handling the protests comes across as a little incorrect, or feels so. The Supreme Court also said that the implementation of the laws could be withheld by the parliament, could be withheld by the government rather. Now, the Supreme Court is right to suggest that if the protests are so furious, if the protests are so fierce, the government may rethink the implementation of the laws. It could perhaps withhold the implementation of the laws and say, all right, let's address the grievances first and then go about the implementation of these laws. But here's the problem. Here's what the Supreme Court may have not taken into context entirely. The government has tried doing that. The government has tried taking into account all the perspectives of the farmers. But if the farmers are so willing to hijack the government, saying that either you repeal the laws or we'll sit on a public space on a very important national highway, how is the government at fault, one wonders. The Supreme Court also said that if the government will not put in hold on the implementation of the laws, the Supreme Court would do it. Now, that is a very dangerous precedence for the future, and that is what I wish to talk about. Now, the Supreme Court is right. It wants to work out a solution. It sees a problem developing at Singhu border. There's nothing wrong with the stance they want to take. But for people who have been covering these protests for the last 6 to 8 weeks, there's one pattern that is emerging very, very clearly. The farmers are misinformed. They talk about MSP being taken away. It's not happening. They talk about their lands being taken away. It is not happening. So there's been a lot of misinformation going on in Singhu. They try to defy certain media channels, ensure that certain media channels do not cover them. Fair enough. But they have been covering a public space, and they've been covering that public space on a misinformed notion. So for the Supreme Court to tell the government that they should withhold these laws because few hundred people at a national before the national capital are misinformed sets a very wrong precedent for the future. Go back to 2020. People sitting at Shaheen Bagh said that the citizenship of Indian Muslims would be taken away after the application of CAA. Did any of that happen? Were their citizenship taken away? The Indian Muslims continue to be citizens of India as they were yesterday, as they are today, as they will be tomorrow. So my worry is, does it set a wrong precedent? Because tomorrow a group of misinformed people can occupy a national highway, threaten the government, hijack the policy making, and yet the Supreme Court would somehow not take into context that these people are also misinformed. The Supreme Court also asked that why were the old people and women kept in the protests? This is something that was also said, that why are they kept in the protests? Now, it's a very valid question. It's brutally cold out there. Women and children have no business in the protests, perhaps because of the harsh conditions there are. And the Supreme Court was right in asking these questions. But are they asking these questions to the right people? Shouldn't these questions be asked to the party representing the protesters? That why are women and children and old men also, old people rather, old men and women being used to propagate a certain agenda? Now, the Supreme Court also said that we understand that the reports are breaking down because the government wants a clause-by-clause discussion and the farmers want to repeal the whole laws. And then they said that they will therefore stay the implementation till the committee makes a discussion. Now, this is a very wrong precedent being set, because the farmers want the complete repeal of the laws. They are not budging anyway. The government has also made its stance very clear that the farm laws won't be repealed. This is not just about Punjab's farmers. The Supreme Court intervenes and says, okay, fine, we'll get a committee in and they'll take a discussion forward. Now, is this going to be how policy is made in India? The policy is made for the people of India. A minority hijacks the entire narrative, gets the media attention, remains misinformed, and the Supreme Court then says, okay, here's a committee, make the discussion favorable towards one party or take the discussion forward. This is how policy going to work. The Supreme Court is also saying that the government has not been very effective in handling the situation. That's also been said. The government responded that the farmer must tell what hurts them. The Supreme Court responds, the CGI that is, he responds that they will tell the committee. Now, this was one of the very stark observations from yesterday, that can the people protesting, instead of communicating with the government, choose to communicate with the committee? So tomorrow, can 10 unemployed men get their mothers and sisters and their old fathers to protest, make a group of 50, occupy a national highway, and say we won't talk to the government, we want to talk to a committee that ensures us a job? This is I'm just giving an example. This is just all oral observations of the Supreme Court, and we're just discussing on them that if this is how it is going to work, it might set a wrong example for the future. Now, the Supreme Court also said that the government had been given a very long rope. They shouldn't lecture the Supreme Court on patience. Well, it turns out the government has been very patient with the farmers. Some personally might agree or disagree on the handling of this entire issue. Some might think that the government should have gone hard upon the farmers, but the government has been very mature. It has been very, very intelligent in dealing with this entire matter. It has repeatedly called out the fallacy of the protest. It has repeatedly asked the farmers to come up with one grievance, which they have not. So the government has been very, very patient. So for the Supreme Court to say that the government has not been patient somewhat doesn't add up really, if I may say that way. Now, another intervener there was yesterday, he also urged this court not to stay the implementation of the laws. And the CJI, he responded, can you persuade the Punjab farmers who have been protesting for 2 months? Let the committee look into it. So at the end, the parliament is supposed to make laws for the country. There are a lot of states, a lot of union territories, 1.3 billion people. In the case of farm laws, we have at least 600 million people directly or indirectly dependent on agriculture. But all the Supreme Court chose to look was, can the government persuade the farmers of Punjab? Fair enough. But what if the farmers of Punjab do not want to be persuaded? What happens then? These are some questions. Another advocate for an intervening party said that they have the trust in the government, and to this the Supreme Court responded that whether you have trust in the government is immaterial. We are the Supreme Court and we will do what we have to do. Supreme Court is the highest court in India. Of course, it has some very learned men, it has some very distinguished men and women. But to say that the Supreme Court will do what it has to do and the trust in the government is immaterial doesn't make for great optics. Of course, this is just oral observation. This is not a declaration. This is not a judgment. This is not a sentencing. But even as an oral observation, for the Supreme Court to think that in the face of a protesting group, the trust of another group in the government for the same laws doesn't mean anything is somewhat incorrect. There was also the discussion that the farmer law will be taken away. The government assured that nothing like that would happen. There was also the questions of MSPs being taken away, of the lands being sold. Again, the government has repeatedly assured it's no part of the laws. The new law says that the MSPs will go away. The contract farming part also says that the contract farming, the land will have no role to play. So the contract will be for the crops. It won't be for the land. This is something that has been repeatedly said across the last 8 to 10 weeks since these protests have begun. So what happened in the Supreme Court today was a mere repetition of it. The Supreme Court also said, one of the advocates representing the farmers also said that they need a prominent place for protests for visibility. Otherwise, there will be no meaning for the protests. And then there was a little discussion on which place is right for the protest to happen. Now, this had me in an hysterical laugh because the farmers are looking to further their cause or further their visibility. Or are they mutually inclusive? Because it's not like they're looking for a wedding banquet for their daughter's wedding. They're looking for a protest site. And the government has been more than cordial. It has been more than accepting. It has been more than inclusive in inviting them for talks over and over again. But if the meaning of protest for visibility means occupying a national highway for 10 weeks, and that is a highway which connects Delhi to Punjab, to Chandigarh, to Himachal Pradesh, to Ladakh, to Jammu, to Kashmir, it's a very wrong precedent, just to put it simply. The government also said that there was an infiltration by the banned organization, and to which the government responded that they will be submitting the reports from the Intelligence Bureau. Now, all in all, the observations of the Supreme Court, some of them are very questionable. These are observations. These are not the judgments. The simple judgment was that the orders were that the implementation of the laws will be stalled. But the oral observations also raise a lot of questions. And these are questions one can always ask in a democracy. Of course, the Supreme Court, as it has repeatedly said, it cannot caters to everyone's opinion, and it should not. But there are few questions that remain after the proceedings of yesterday and today. One, what it means for the economic policy making in India in the future. Because every time an economic policy will be made, there will be some economic redistribution. There will be some groups that might be impacted. For instance, if tomorrow BSNL is to be privatized for its better functioning, can the employees of BSNL occupy a national highway and say our interests are being eroded, our fundamental rights are being denied, and therefore BSNL cannot be privatized? Will the Supreme Court still be in a position to intervene because they intervened today? That's one question. The second question, won't this encourage more protests? Now today, already on Twitter, on social media, the proceedings are being seen as a victory for the farmers. The Supreme Court may not see it as a victory for the farmers. It's looking to work towards a solution. But the farmers are seeing it as a personal victory because they've got the first leg in the door. They've got the implementation of the laws to be stalled. But does it encourage more protests in the future? Because looking at these farmers at Singhu border who have been shamefully occupying a national highway for 10 weeks, some other protesters might get some other ideas for some other laws that may be applied in the future. The third question is, doesn't this result in policy paralysis by virtue of leaving everything to the Supreme Court at the end? Every time, this is an economic policy, this is not a political policy even. There might be better political policies in the future, we don't know. But are we entering a phase of policy paralysis where a government with more than 300 Lok Sabha MPs with a Rajya Sabha majority cannot formulate a policy unless it goes to a Supreme Court? And is the Supreme Court going to interfere with the committee every time? The fourth question is, what if a judgment by the Supreme Court is given the same treatment? What if tomorrow a group of protesters decide that let's sit in front of the Supreme Court until our demands are heard? That is the fourth question. And the last question is that the implementation of the laws has been stalled indefinitely. What happens as times run out? Who pays for the cost? Because there's a certain cost to the implementation of these protests. Who is going to pay the cost? Is the Supreme Court going to pay it? That's the final question. Now, there was another oral observation that was made in the Supreme Court about the Attorney General. He said that there's no question of a huge group of 1 lakh people entering the city on Republic Day. We can't say where all will they go. Now, Republic Day is a very high profile event. It's the most secured event in Delhi, which happens in the annual calendar. To this, the Chief Justice of India responded, it's within your police powers to control that and check if they are armed. Now, how does the Chief Justice of India, with all due respect, expect the police to also ensure security for Republic Day and also ensure that 1 lakh people are not armed? And what constitutes the definition of armed? Can they walk in with the flags? Can they walk in with who knows what? But what constitutes as armed? How is it even allowed? It brings me to a very interesting story from history of Robert Clive. He was one of the first British to be in India. He ruled Bengal between 1765 and 1772. And there was this dual system of government. Don't look it up. It's something similar to what we are seeing today. Now, the dual system of government, it gave the Britishers the authority, but not the responsibility. So at the end, the Nawab was a puppet of the British, but the British had only the authority. They were not interested in the responsibility. The responsibility fell on that Nawab. And now when he performed badly, he was pushed out, another one was installed, and this all happened. Between 1757 and 1763, Bengal itself saw 3 regimes change. But what the Robert Clive was doing for the Britishers was he's exercising all the authority without taking any responsibility. And the question that begs today is our Supreme Court also doing the same? Should the Supreme Court be appointing committees in everything? Should the Supreme Court decide that who the protesters will talk to? Should the Supreme Court decide what the committee will be of, or will the committee be needed in the first place? These are some very ambiguous questions that will need answers, and they'll need answers fast. And one can only hope that, fine, the Supreme Court has decided to intervene. A resolution to this entire problem comes into play. Because it's not the Singhu farmers who are suffering. They seem to be having a ball over there. The government is doing what it should and it's doing correctly. But the common people of the region are suffering. The people who use that highway every day are suffering. And it would have been helpful if the Supreme Court had also taken into context the interests of the common people of those regions. Thank you.